How to stop interrupting people all the time. So this is an article response, and I decided to do this because I'm getting ready to do my self-care journey video, and I wanted to read an article to find out more information for my self-care journey session. And so here we are. This is an article response. I'm going to read the article and offer my thoughts while I'm reading it. How to stop yourself from interrupting people all the time. And this article is in a magazine called Fatherly. So I noticed in skimming through it that it is kind of geared towards men, but the information, of course, can be used by anybody. How to stop yourself from interrupting people all the time. Serial interrupting pisses people off and makes you seem selfish and impatient. Here's how to kick the habit. And this is by Jeremy Brown, April 13th, 2018. And the link is in the chat there for you to pick up on this article, read it for yourself, see what your response is. Hopefully you'll drop a line here and we can chop it up. And then also, if you're watching this afterwards on YouTube, then that link is going to be in the description. Life is full of interruptions. Some are great. It says, when a toddler taps you on the shoulder to deliver such important information as wee woo lee lay hedgehog butt, it is never not hilarious. Others, however, are of the not so great variety, like when someone constantly interrupts a story you're telling or talks over you. We get it, Brad. You know a lot about craft beer. It's almost always infuriating, and it's pretty much universally considered rude behavior. And chances are, whether you're talking to your friends, family, or your spouse, definitely your spouse, you're very guilty of this behavior too. Because, well, you're a man and men interrupt. So again, this is geared towards men, but we could take it for everybody. So what's the underlying psychology of interrupting, and how can we learn to stop? Interruption is a tried and true way of asserting dominance in a conversation. And per a rather wide array of social science research, men are the main interrupters. I can definitely say that for myself. And that was one of the reasons why I was happy about this topic. I don't interrupt people like I used to. And all mine was out of positive intent. So I'm much better now, but I'm always looking to learn more. And my self-care session today was about this topic. But the habit is particularly present when men speak to women. It says whether intentionally or not, interruptions happen in regular conversations all the time. But the habit is particularly present when men speak to women. In fact, a 2014 study published in the Journal of Language and Social Psychology found that men interrupted women on average of 2.1 times over the course of a 3-minute conversation. Damn, man, we're a little heavy on the interrupting. When talking to men, they interrupt nearly 1/3 less when women are talking to men. Whether you realize you're a chronic interrupter or not, interrupting all the time is not good for your image or relationships. It pisses people off and makes you seem like a boorish, insensitive, impatient alpha male who can't wait a few minutes to interject. What's up, Reggie? Thanks for hanging out, brother. Who can't wait a few minutes to interject with a counter argument, funny story, or factoid about sour beers, Brad. Do it enough, and it also puts other people immediately on the defense. Rita, thanks for hanging out. As none of these are enjoyable outcomes, here are 7 tips to help you to stop interrupting people so often and kick the habit for good. And here we go with the 7. Number 1, don't think about what you'll say next. People with a predilection for interruption will often simply wait until their partner is done talking and then jump in with an already formulated response. This is definitely something that I was guilty of for sure, because the way that my mind works, I'm a very intuitive person, and I'm also a very intelligent and educated person. So when I hear a person talk, a lot of times with those things combined together at such a high degree, I kind of already know what people are going to say a lot of times before they say it. And so sometimes I would interrupt to almost help a person to not go around the mulberry bush, and to save them time. But I put up a quote. In fact, I'm going to find it on Facebook. I put up a quote a while back where I was like, be careful that you're, I forgot how I phrased it, but it was, to sum it up, it's like, be careful that you're positive interrupting to save a person 5 minutes doesn't equal a 15-minute trip around the mulberry bush. Because what I found out was that even if you understand what a person is saying or what they're gonna say, interrupting them sometimes is okay. Sometimes, under the right conditions is okay, because they'll realize and thank you, like, oh yeah, because I was gonna say that. Other times it's not okay, because the person is actually trying to explain their heart and their intent. And so it's not so much about the logistics of what they're saying, so much as it is about the fact that they just need to and desire to be heard. And so to hear them, even if you already know the answer, is a lot of times the most helpful thing that you can do. Kim Green says, hello. Hey, Eunice. Hey, Kim. Hey, Reggie. Hey, Rita, thanks for hanging out. Let me know if you all experienced this. Maurice, thanks for hanging out. So, people will often interrupt, people who have a predilection for it will awfully simply wait until the person is done and then jump in with an already formulated response. However, Dr. Racine R. Henry, a marriage and family therapist and the founder of Sankofa Marriage and Family Therapy, suggests simply listening during a conversation instead of locking and loading what you're saying next. Be engaged with what they are saying and what they're trying to convey to you, she says, versus thinking, what am I going to say back to them? Don't form your answer in your head while they're speaking. I was totally guilty of that. Again, but it was out of positivity of being such an intuitive person. But the thing that I learned, even in getting feedback from being in a situation like this and having people that were better communicators, was like, before you dish out your formulated response, can you first acknowledge what I said to you? And this was something that I even had to point out to someone the other day. Can you first acknowledge what was said to you? I realized that that's what lets a person know that you heard them, not your formulated response. Even if your response is dead on, it still skips over what they said and just shares your feelings. And that's not helpful a lot of times, especially if you want people to have a good experience in the conversation with you. So be engaged with what they're saying and what they're trying to convey to you versus thinking, what am I going to say back? So that's the first thing. Here's the second thing, which I actually just heard in my self-care session. Wait 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. A serial interrupter has a tendency to seek out any gap in the conversation and take it as their cue to leap in and steamroll ahead. An intake of breath can open the door for an interrupter to hijack the conversation. Racine suggests that when your partner is done talking, pause for 10 seconds. Pause for 10 seconds. That way, you can really be sure that the other person is finished with their statement versus just taking a breath or pausing, she says. This way, you're not just interrupting them mid-sentence or mid-train of thought. This was another really good lesson that I learned as I'm communicating, and I have a friend who communicates where she actually takes long pauses in between her communication to gather her thoughts. Plus, she just doesn't have any rush to speak. It's those of us that are musicians, one of the things that we know is that silence is music too. A rest in music, when you see it, whether you read it on paper and you actually see what a rest looks like on paper, various rests, or if it's just silence, for some other reason, rest is music too. Hey, Merlon, I know you can attest to that. You come in right on time. Rest in music is music as well. Silence is music too. So what I realize is that there's a lot of times a person may be pausing in order to either A, gather their thoughts, or just take a damn break, to just pause. And so what I had to learn was not to just interject there, because I had to learn, this person isn't finished actually. And that was a really good lesson for me, because it helped me to, again, conduct the conversation better. And the point is, when you're in the midst of a conversation, no matter how much you have a point about something, the point isn't to so much be right about everything. The point is to have a conversation, which is a dialogue. And a dialogue means that it can't just be that you get your point across and they're having like, yeah, like I'm finally saying what I mean. It has to be that the other person feels that same way. And that's even if your point is more valid than them or what have you. You won't get a point through to them. Tone is everything. Tone and tone of conversation is everything. So you won't get a point through to a person and they won't even be able to hear you if you can't hear them, or if you're over talking them, or if you're shouting, or if you're not listening and interjecting, or if when they say something you don't even acknowledge, you don't even give them, you all know how like when you put something in the mail and they ask you for if you want that option where a receipt option where when the person receives it you get a receipt that lets you know that it's received, and you can choose not to do that, but if you do it, it at least lets you know that the package got there. In conversation, you have to give a person that package to let them know that the conversation was heard. And it's not about agreeing or disagreeing, because that's the other thing that I realize we can fall in the habit of. It's not about whether you agree or disagree. It's about acknowledgement of receipt. It's about letting the person know that you hear what they're saying. And then you can expect them to be willing to continue in a conversation with you. If not, you can't blame them for not wanting to hear you. And it also may be the cause of their defensiveness as well, if all of a sudden you notice that they start becoming defensive. Since I've gotten better at conversation, I've noticed this when talking to people who I can tell they aren't used to someone being able to be patient and hear them out. Hey, Anoa, thanks for hanging out. My old classmate. They are not they're not used to someone hearing them out. So what'll happen is, me now being a patient person in conversation and being able to have this kind of conversation and this kind of balance, I'll notice when a person immediately is going on the defense. Immediately it's like, and I'm like, oh, because you're used to boxing in conversation. Like you're used to somebody where the only way you can get your thought through was that you had to hurry up and interject, and you had to do the same thing that they did, which was not acknowledge what they said and be like, but I'm saying this, and they come back and like, yeah, but what about this? And matter of fact, one of the things that happened to me, I would say about maybe 2 months ago, was I was hanging out at JoJo's, and during our break, I happened to connect with a couple, a married couple that was sitting right in front of me at the table, and we connected on the music and that kind of thing. They liked what they were hearing and they felt the energy. And we immediately got into some like life shit, right? Where they kind of asked me like my philosophy about life, and they could see like just through my vibe that I had like a vibe. And so we wound up realizing and finding out that we were like on the same tip. Now, the interesting thing though was that there was a point of disagreement between the husband and the wife, and I could understand both sides of the equation. And so it was really fun. I was like, oh, I'll be able to jump in here and have some fun and help them to see that like they're both right, and here's what they both are saying. Because I noticed this that we're talking about here, that they were so used to talking at each other that they couldn't actually hear each other's valid point, because neither one of them was giving acknowledgement of receipt. And I really feel like it came from the husband, because I watched the way he responded. Just because he had a point about something, he would immediately go into this thing. And I looked at his wife and I noticed she was so used to it that it made her just come right back, and they could not hear each other, even though they both had points that were valid, but they couldn't even be able to get to that point and be like, I understand your point, I see what you're saying, because they would not do that. Aaron Johnson, thanks for hanging out, bro. How's everything going? So 10 seconds, y'all. Wait 10 seconds. And that's the thing that I've learned, like I said, in communicating, even with people who have longer pauses and take their time and are good communicators. So I learned it naturally, but I had never heard it put that way. So I like that. That's a good tip. Tip number 3, stop looking for a solution. This was another problem of mine. I'm a person that like is very solution oriented. I can't help it. I don't like to dwell in like the woe is me. I don't like to dwell in the complaining. And I don't like to see other people do that too. So when someone would say something to me, I would automatically move to trying to fix it, because of the fact that that's the way that I work with myself. Now, at some point, I learned how to be even more present with my own feelings, and also to be present with other people's feelings as well. because sometimes a person doesn't need you to fix their situation. They just need to be heard. Hey, bro, thanks for hanging out, Aaron. So stop looking for a solution. Now, again, this article is geared towards men, so he's going to address it this way. But again, this is for everybody. He says, men are fixers. It's just the way dudes are wired and socialized from a young age as well. And that's true. As a result, sometimes the nuances of conversation are lost and we spend the entire discussion focusing on what can I do? Or how can I help? So when someone is talking about an issue, the fixer is already working on the problem and devising an answer, which they will probably blurt out mid-sentence. Another interruption. Sometimes it isn't about improving anything or fixing anything, Racine says. Sometimes it's just about listening and about being there and supporting someone. And I just talked with a friend recently about that. Like, the most important thing that you can do with a person is not fix things for them, is to be present with them. Hey, Louima, how you doing, bro? Hey, have you talked to Steven Anderson, man? I haven't talked to him in a while. If you have, man, tell him, give me a holler and tell him I say hello. And how are you, bro? So, mid-sentence, you cannot cut a person off and try to just fix their stuff. That does not help. A lot of times if a person is dealing with something, the problem for me is when I hear people complain about something, I immediately think that they want a solution. And so now what I've learned is I'm not like that anymore. Now I'm like, oh, and I'm a good listener. You know, I've always been a good listener, and that's why people enjoy talking to me, because they can trust me and they can trust that I'm a good listener. But I had to also realize when it came to this aspect of listening that sometimes when a person is complaining about something, sometimes when they don't like something, they're like, this person treated me like, oh, I don't know what to do about this. Sometimes they are not asking for you to fix their problem or get them a solution. They're just saying, I'm feeling this way and I need somebody to feel me. And there's too many people out here that don't offer that listening, balance. And so a lot of times a person is just like, hey, I can't find anybody to listen. Will you listen? And you don't want to fall into the same category by just trying to jump straight to a solution. Next step, try the repeat back method. This was another thing I learned. And as I learned it, as it was taught to me, it was called mirroring. Another way is mirroring. Try the repeat back method. During stressful conversations or fights, Racine suggests repeating back what your partner has just relayed. Not verbatim, but a reframing of what was said that shows them that you not only heard it, but that you also understood it. It's a really good listening technique, she says. So if someone says, I'm angry at you because you hurt my feelings, saying back to them, so what you're saying is, because I did this thing that caused you pain, you're now angry at me for not making a better decision. That way the conversation stays about what they're trying to convey and what they're saying to you, and less about your reactivity to it. I cannot agree with that more. I'm going to read a couple comments too before we go on to this next one. So keep dropping the comments. That was a huge, huge, huge lesson for me in the last couple years of my life. The mirroring technique. And I was grateful that during that time, that the person that I was communicating with was very patient with me to help me through that and to give me the space in order to practice mirroring, to practice repeating back. And I'm gonna tell you the number one tough thing about mirroring and repeating back. It is that if you do not agree with what the person is saying, it can feel like as you're repeating it back that you're somehow consenting or agreeing with it. And that's a misconception. And a person has to get over it as far as their pride or as far as their ego, to get over that that's what they're doing. Because you're not doing that. You're actually just acknowledging. You're doing another receipt. I've received this. So let me get in your shoes for a second. Let me empathize. Let me make sure I heard what you said. Because that's the other piece too that happens so often. When you just go back and forth and you don't restate or mirror or repeat back what a person says, then often you can give a response that may not even be related to what the person was actually trying to tell you. And so if you do that, then the person has to now correct that and try to go back to tell you again. But if they correct it, you can get lost even more. And then before you know it, the conversation spirals out of control. Nobody feels heard. Nobody feels understood. You feel like you're bumping heads and you just get nowhere. So repeating back is a humbling thing, because it allows you to be in the person's place for a second, to empathize, and to at least say, so what I understand you to be saying is this. It's not saying I agree. It's saying what I understand you to be saying is this. My brother is in the building. What's up, Push'em? How you feeling, bro? How you and the fam, bro? And so that's I could literally stop the whole video on that. That is so important. And until it was taught to me, I had never heard of it. I didn't grow up in that kind of communicative environment, even within my family. I didn't grow up in that way. And it wasn't terrible communication, but it didn't involve that. So I didn't even know what the hell that was. I'm like, in fact, I was at first like, oh my God. And here's the other reason too why it was humbling for me, because I'm also a person where when I communicate, my intuition is at such a level where I don't really need a person to do this for me. I can gauge whether you really understand me or not, and whether you really understand what I'm saying. But what I was mistaking though was that just because I didn't need that others didn't need that as well. And that's what was a big life lesson for me, because I was like, at first, why do you need, like, it should be understood that I understand what you're saying just by my response. And I was like, oh, it's not. And I had to humble myself and stop just believing what I was saying to myself. And I had to realize it might be that way for me, but I can't interpret that for anybody else. I have to be willing to bend. And it has helped a whole lot, because it's changed the way that people communicate with me. It's changed. It's made for better understandings, especially in the midst of misunderstandings. This is really important. So that's the repeat back technique. Next thing, turn the tables. If a person has pointed out your penchant for cutting him or her off, it might be wise to have them to show you what it feels like by demonstrating how your interruptions come across. Sometimes experiencing what others are experiencing with you can be quite eye-opening, says Heidi McBain, a Texas-based marriage and family therapist. I think that's so true. So true. Sometimes you do need a person to say, here's what it feels like, just for a second, so you can go, oh, wow. Because a lot of times when you're in your own head, you only experience things from one perspective. So you don't really know what it feels like from the other side, and so I think that's a really good tip. Take yourself out of it. That's the next tip. When a partner is venting to the other, sometimes men, and I want to say people, but I'll just keep on. Sometimes men want to remove themselves from the discussion as a means of avoiding drama. They don't want to hear about the annoying coworker or a dust up with their wife's friend, and they'll cut the conversation off in the hopes of cutting it short. However, Racine says that when they have to remove themselves from this equation, this is about supporting the person that's talking to you or hearing about their experience, she says. So how can you look at it through their lens and think about what they're feeling? That's the goal. Ashley, thanks for hanging out. That's the goal. Take yourself out of it. It's understandable when certain people want to nag and just argue for the sake of arguing and all these kind of things, that like you could be like real talk, like I don't even have time for this. But sometimes we do that when we do that in a premature way, where we're cutting a person off and just cutting the conversation off because we just don't want to hear it, period. But that's very dismissive to that person's feelings, though, because they might really need to express something to you, and just because you don't want to talk about it, just like whatever, but like that really is hurtful. And you don't really want someone to do that to you when you're trying to express and just be heard, just be understood, just be felt, Next thing, practice talking. Say, listen, it sounds weird, but if you're a serial interrupter, you need to practice listening and shutting up. McBain recommends practicing the art of conversation every night. And in here, they're talking about with a spouse, but you can practice this, period. But instead of having the floor, take the time to lend an ear and simply listen to what your partner has to say. Pick a topic and then listen to what the other person is saying. She says, reflect back what you're hearing them say and check in. That's a good word too. Check in to make sure what you're hearing is truly what they're saying. It cannot be understated. We all communicate. It can't be overstated. We all communicate in various different ways. So sometimes when a person is saying something, you think that they're saying one thing, and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they're saying something totally different, but you would not know that assuming. You have to do the extra work of being like, so let me make sure I understand you. So what I'm understanding you to be saying is, I remember my homeboy used to do this years ago, and I used to appreciate that. And yeah, so practice just, being a listening ear. Linwood, what's happening, brother? And that is the end of this article. I think that those tips are extremely useful. I think that this person was dead on. Jeremy Brown, I think he was dead on with this. I think that I like that it was short and sweet because you really don't need a lot. To be honest, if you just practice these few things, honestly, it changes the whole dynamic of everything. So once again, don't think about what you're saying next. I mean, what you will say next. Don't have even if you have a preconceived answer, don't just be so quick to rattle it off. What I found is this, because I still can hear what a person is going to say before they say it. I still know where they're going to go. I still know what I'm going to say, and it still may be true. But what I've now learned how to do is to take all these steps, and actually just do those steps first before I go ahead with my preconceived condition, my pre-made response, pre-formulated. I do these other things first, and then I let that fall last in line, because you can't lose if you check in these different ways. And like I said, you'll be heard better, because the person will be like, wow, now I can hear you, because I really felt like you took the time. And it requires patience, because I tell you, sometimes in the midst of an argument, you don't want to do this. Sometimes in the midst of a disagreement, you do not want to do this. You're just like, and I still have my times where I interrupt and where I mess up. But the good thing is, these are always in the back of my mind, and I'm able to pause at any time and just stop, take a breath, and regroup. So the tips are, again, don't think about what you'll say next. Wait 10 seconds. Stop looking for a solution. Try to repeat back, or the mirroring method. Turn the table so you can put yourself in their shoes, or if you're being interrupted, show them what it feels like. Take yourself out of it, so that way you can realize it's not about you, and you can just be a listener and hear, and then mirror back. And then practice talking. Literally practice having these conversations where you just spark up a conversation just so that you can listen and not interrupt. And yeah, I think this was a great article. Go check it out. And please, by all means, drop a line to this chat, or if you're watching later on YouTube, drop a line. Please let me know what your experience is of either interrupting or being interrupted. And I look forward to continuing to chop it up with you all. So take care, be well. Talk to you soon. Peace.